connected with our Jack Straw Writers program, and that's how we first met Claire. And we actually have a series of Jack Straw Writers doing Humanities Washington talks over the coming months, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. First, I do want to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot nations, and other Coast Salish peoples, past and present. And the staff, board, and artists of Jack Straw Cultural Center acknowledge that we're living, creating, working, and playing on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle and the Salish Sea, and we honor them and the land itself with deep gratitude. And thank you all for being here with us. Thank you also to Aisha and Daniel, who are handling the technical side of things. This is part of Humanities Washington's Speakers Bureau program. They have a few things that they want us to say as well. They are dedicated, they're a nonprofit, they're dedicated to sparking conversation and critical thinking, and they provide many other cultural programs to hundreds of thousands of people throughout Washington every year. So they are a statewide organization. I think Claire, like all of the speakers, will probably be going all over the state, which is cool. And they get support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Washington Secretary of State, the Thomas S. Foley Institute for Public Policy and Public Service at Washington State University, and generous private donors. And you can visit their website, humanities.org, to find other events. And we have other events here at Jack Straw, as I mentioned, in both featuring Jack Straw writers. February 12th, Shankar Narayan is going to be here giving his talk, AI, Civil Rights, and the Fight for a Just Future. And on March 13th, Daniel Atkinson is going to be here giving his talk, The Vanguard Generation, African American Artists, 1880 to 1918. And those should be great. And we have one planned for April, but because they do these applications in quarterly chunks, we haven't actually confirmed it yet. I have to apply for that one, but fingers crossed we'll be having Claudia Castro-Luna talk here in April as well. So really excited to have all these Jack Straw writers as part of the Speakers Bureau. Also, for our writers program and other residencies, we get funding from the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, For Culture, Washington State Arts Commission, National Endowment for the Arts, Lester and Phyllis Epstein Foundation, Arts Fund, and individual contributors. And of course, we always welcome more individual contributors of any amount. It's all appreciated and helps keep us going in these trying times. So yeah, Claire first came in through the Jack Straw Writers program and is a multifaceted artist whose work you've probably seen out in the city in one form or another, whether you knew it or not. And I wanted to mention, apparently all of the sticky notes are going to be exhibited at Gallery for Culture this spring, she just told me, opening the first Thursday in May into June. So I'm excited to check that out.
Yep, if you want to see more of them, you can see them there.
Yeah, all right. With that, Clare Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's so exciting to be here. I'm so grateful to be part of the Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau for this year and the following year. And to kick it off at Jack Straw, where I was a fellow for writing in 2015. And I actually have a special surprise from then at the end of the talk. But just to get started, my name is Clare Johnson. I'm an artist and writer. I was born and raised in Seattle, where I still live. And today I'm going to talk to you about my Post-it note project, which essentially uses sticky notes to document my life one night at a time for almost 2 decades so far. And so for the rest of the talk, I'll be showing slides of various Post-its I've made over the years. And you're absolutely welcome to ask me questions at the end about any of them. So if there's anything where you're curious to know more about it, whether it's the story behind it, you want to know what the drawing is actually meant to be of, or you can't quite read my handwriting and you want to know what I was saying, just make note of something for yourself about it, like the date or the color, something in the drawing, so you remember at the Q&A at the end if you want to ask me about it. So I often call this a project, but it's actually more of a practice. Every night before bed I make a piece of art and or writing on a Post-it to try and save something from the ending day. And it could be any experience from earlier in the day, or something I'm just feeling or thinking about in that moment, something I'm looking at in my bedroom, or even a memory from the past that I'm reminded of for some reason before bedtime. Sometimes they're not about that actual day at all. They can be any style, whatever I feel like making in that moment. In my larger art life, I do things in different styles. I do public art, I do writing, but in the Post-its, everything comes together. I can do whatever I want as long as it's just a Post-it. Some of them are serious. They could be silly, they could be cartoony, some of them are messy, some are meticulously detailed where I accidentally go to bed over an hour later than I meant to because I'm drawing a poofy dressed lady from the cover of the book I'm reading. Or sometimes it's just like the word migraine scrawled in big letters because I can't face it. I can't do anything that night. So they're very different. Some of them are even no drawing at all. Like some of them are just small, spontaneous poems about the moment I'm in. I started doing it in fall of 2005, but there was actually a long series of steps that ended up sort of leading to this. And I didn't know at the time that they were leading to this. A lot of people can think of an art project as this perfectly formed idea that someone has that's very mysterious and separate from real life. But for me, it's very grounded in the human experience, and I don't always know how it's going to work out at the time or what I'm leading to. So behind the scenes, the first spark of this project was actually a couple of years before I started it, 2.5 years before I started it, or knew anything about what I was doing. It was halfway through my junior year of college when a close friend died really suddenly of a pulmonary embolism. And I was away studying abroad in England for the year at an art school. She was back at our normal college. And the way the art school worked was you're supposed to be in the studio every day making art. And I just couldn't, in my grief and my isolation, being far away from everyone who knew her. And it was so shocking. And again, I think that's a misconception people have sometimes about art, is that artists or writers can create beautiful things out of traumatic moments. And that can be true, for sure. But in the actual moment of my grief, I felt unable to make anything. And I also felt unable to sort of go into the public space of the studio, to be producing something for people to look at. So when I finally got back to the studio, I don't know why, but for some reason the only thing that I could make for several weeks were small abstract paintings on Post-its. And I've always liked Post-its. I've always been interested in things relating to memory. But I don't know why in that moment. I think it was approachable. It was small. I didn't have to explain it very much. And that's what I did. It can be really hard to sort of put yourself out there and think clearly when you're in that kind of grief. My intention with these small paintings on Post-its was that I was going to leave them in library books for people to find anonymously. I've always liked the idea of art as something that could help people connect without knowing or meeting each other. That you could feel things in common through the art that you wouldn't necessarily ever show each other in person. And even today, when I'm talking about my public art projects, I talk about wanting them to be like a gift a gift for a stranger, but from a stranger too. Just sort of emerging out of the everyday landscape, like a pleasant surprise. And that's how I imagined these Post-its. But I never did it. I still find them in my own books from college. This is just where they are now. And when I got back to my normal college the next year, my professor was really unsure what to make of these, and I was too. They were kind of too personal. They were, at the same time, not very clear to anyone else why they were personal or what was personal about them. And my professor had this vague suggestion that maybe they would seem more meaningful if I put a date on the back of them. But again, I just never ended up showing them to anyone at all until now, today. They're debuting in this talk right now. But I just kind of put them back in the book and didn't think about it till a few years later when I was in grad school, back in England again, and just suddenly realized that I wanted to record little moments of my life in Post-its. It just suddenly came together at that moment, 2.5 years later. So ritual plays a big part in this, and at the same time, ritual is something I've always had a complicated relationship with. Having known rituals in place from society or religion or your family can really carry you through a lot of things, and they can help us mark and understand and cope with big transitions like birth or death, or there's also a lot around weddings. Rituals that are instilled in us can just automatically bolster us and give us support through big changes. You don't have to think about it or figure out what to do, but the problem for me is that my brain always does think about it. For as long as I can remember, I've been really unable to automatically accept rituals or feel part of them a lot of the time, a lot of societal rituals. And I'm often watching the way that they're not fully serving everyone, especially people whose life trajectory or physical or emotional needs are a little outside of the norm, which I often felt like that person. But even sometimes I felt like they weren't fully serving people who were actually fully loving and valuing these rituals. One example I think of a lot is wedding gifts that I would notice that like wedding gifts come from this lovely idea of like communal support as somebody moves into a new space of life and builds a new house, I believe, like a new home traditionally. But then I would watch that tradition kind of morph as nowadays people often have already moved in together by the time they get married and do that ritual. And I would see it morph into this kind of societal pressure instead around expectations of how much people were spending on gifts. And then that could be very alienating when you're struggling financially or can't meet that societal expectation, even though you want to show your support. And I would just watch it kind of miss the mark of what I wanted it to be. And then other times I just felt like a societal ritual was completely missing for many of the really big transitions of my life. For example, where was the community ritual for my divorce? When I was actually having to build a new home, but with half the resources and a seriously broken heart, and there was no ritual for that. So the other thing is that for my brain and my body, one of the biggest, most difficult transitions that I need support around, something where I truly need a ritual to cope, is something that happens every night, which is just bedtime. It's not a big thing like death or marriage. It's just bedtime. For me, bedtime itself is a huge transition. It always has been. You can ask my parents who are in the audience right now. They will attest. It has been a lifelong issue. I'm a lifelong insomniac. I had childhood asthma at night as well, which was very scary. I'm actually struggling a little with some asthma right now, which is why I'm a little hoarse. So yeah, I was a lifelong insomniac, which is, lonely and stressful at bedtime. And I also have neurodivergence that means my body and my brain and my nerves are often taking in more than they should all day long. They're just overwhelming me with input that is really hard to switch off. It doesn't switch off visually even for me when I close my eyes. And it's really helpful for me to have somewhere external to put that, even just a small part of that. And so bedtime was one of the spaces where my whole life I was trying from like a very young age, before I even understood or had words for any of these things about myself, to add more ritual. And I tried lots of different things. As a little kid, I would really religiously say I love you to every family member before bed, but also to every inanimate object in the room, which got unsustainable. I started a nightly journal. Starting in 8th grade, I did every night, which these are all my journals from then till now. I think I'm on my 51st one. And like, I also would blow, when I was living away from home, I would blow kisses in the direction of loved ones in far-flung places when I was feeling alone or far away. And in teenage years, I started one that was really good ritual for me, which was sort of lying on my back on top of the covers, listening to a certain song in the dark, which actually you can see in the bottom middle post-it here, is a reenactment of that. Those are song lyrics in the words from a song that I listened to in high school in those kinds of moments. But I struggled with how to maintain any of these rituals, especially sharing a room or sharing a bed with a partner. Whenever circumstances changed, they weren't sustainable. They weren't the right one for me. So as I've been making them over the years, I've come to understand that in addition to those steps over time that started with my friend's death in college, there's just a lot of things about me personally that have led to me doing this project. It's my neurodivergence, my insomnia, my personality, and obsession with saving memories. And probably in the beginning, I was also acting on a kind of deep-seated wish or impulse to have saved my friend as well. So we can call it an artwork because I'm an artist and I have exhibited it as art and or shown it as writing in different places. But really, it's a ritual that I made for myself to cope with very human experiences that many people share. Not wanting life to slip away, wanting to hold on to memories, not wanting days to end, feeling alone or unseen, worrying about not existing. And we all have those feelings in different ways. But the extra element here for me is that I'm also a queer person. I'm lesbian. And I grew up in a very loving, accepting, and supporting family in a time when gayness was no longer illegal, in a city where it was relatively safe. And I was very lucky. But no matter the time or the place, one thing that is true for almost all queer people is that it is very hard to find ourselves in history. And don't get me wrong, we have existed the whole time. There's some very famous people throughout history who are known to be gay at this point, but it's still very rarely talked about. And even as a gay artist myself, there's famous artists from the past who I never knew were gay, like even until my 40s. When I happened to read a very recent book that's just specifically about gay power couples in American history. And I had learned about Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns in art history class. I had thought nothing of it. They're super famous. I had never known that they were a couple for years and very devoted. And I mean, didn't stay together forever, but I just never knew. I'd seen their work in museums. No one ever explained to me that they were queer. So famous people's queer identities continue to be kept mostly hidden or under wraps, even long after their death. And a lot of history texts still don't seem to think it's important to mention their sexuality. But it's important for queer people. It's important for us to feel seen and to feel part of something. And for those around us, our friends, our coworkers, our family, our neighbors, to see how we've contributed to society and been a real part of it throughout time. And obviously, famous figures' queerness being hidden comes from a lack of societal acceptance, which continues over time. But even more strongly, I would say it came from a lack of safety, a total lack of safety. Sometimes history hides us because didn't think we were important, but a lot of times we've had to hide ourselves to survive, ideally to thrive, but sometimes just to survive. And people would pretend to live straight lives in order to not be arrested or institutionalized. And in fact, a lot of the historical records you can find of queerness are from police reports, crime, like newspaper reports about the crime. But people could find ways to sort of live as so-called spinsters or bachelors. They could act like roommates or live alone, potentially live with other family members. And then they would destroy the evidence of their love life over time. So, for example, there's a lot of evidence that poet Emily Dickinson was in a romantic relationship with her sister-in-law. Apparently, she herself stipulated that all her correspondence with her sister-in-law should be destroyed upon her own death and burned. And it's not unusual. Historically, there's been such shame around gayness that surviving family members would destroy it if she hadn't stipulated that herself. And not seeing ourselves in history can make it feel like gay people didn't exist at all before the later 20th century. So it really contributes to feeling alone or unseen or unimportant, and to some extent even unsafe. So I find that is similar to the feeling of feeling outside societal rituals as well. Feeling outside of the rituals that you see around you, you see other people partaking in, can be lonely. And just like being thrown out of history, it makes you feel like you don't exist. Or at least like no one around you knows or believes that your experiences are real. Humanity really thrives on a sense of legacy, I think, of learning from each other and our collective pasts. Being untethered from that can really hurt people's sense of self-worth and our development in the world. Tons of people can be marginalized and shut out from history. It's not just gay people. This can happen for all kinds of reasons. But the thing is, queer people don't even have a cultural legacy in our own families of origins because it's not passed down from generation to generation. Many of us grow up thinking that we're the only one, not just in our immediate family, but in our entire lineage. Even though, there's no way that's true, but we're not given evidence of anything else usually. And I will admit, like I said, this was a messy process. I didn't know everything about this project when I started it, so it took me a while to understand how much my Post-it making ritual was actually about this. I honestly didn't think consciously about the relationship between my Post-its and queer cultural erasure until years and years into doing it, over a decade into doing it, when I suddenly learned about a woman named Anne Lister. And Anne Lister lived in England from 1791 to 1840 and enjoyed an unusual amount of privilege as a woman. She was white, living in England, and also she was a landowner, which was really unusual at the time. And she was also very, very actively lesbian. She had different very serious female partners over time, and actually seemed to be relatively open with her relatives about this as well. Her immediate family seemed to understand that she was going to partner with a woman, not a man. and she seemed pretty accepted by them. And even though I'm actively, as a queer person and a writer, kind of searching for gay history, the only reason I even know about Anne Lister at all was just because HBO happened to do a dramatized television show based on her life with actors portraying her. It was called Gentleman Jack, and it didn't come out that long ago. The only reason anyone knows about her queerness at all to have made that show, which is that she kept an incredibly detailed journal of every bit of her life, including her sex life, really detailed. And she wrote it in a code so no one could read it. She called it her crypt hand. It's probable that she meant to destroy this journal herself, or it's a series of journals. It's probable that she meant to destroy it herself, but she died abroad in Europe, like at age 40 or something like that. So they survived, and the majority of the volumes of her journal were still back in England, where her ancestral home was. So then, almost 60 years later, in the late 1800s, a younger relative who was also now thought to be secretly gay himself, finally deciphered the code in her journals, and then he strongly considered destroying them, apparently because it was still illegal then, and he was worried about his own reputation and the fact that he'd had some sort of scandals. And he just happened to decide that the rest of them was enough of a historical, sort of important historical record that he kept them, and he thought, well, nobody's going to be able to decipher these parts. And then because the family was lucky and sort of wealthy enough to own land, and this ancestral home still existed, they ended up getting saved after his death because the estate with all of its belongings, including the journals, became a historical site after his death. So they stayed there, but it wasn't until the late 1980s that the public ever got to see the contents of the journal, or series of journals again. So the set of circumstances that led to me knowing about this lesbian in history was so complicated and unlikely that it still sort of feels like a miracle to me that I know about it at all. And there's just such a huge sense of relief when you see yourself in history, or you have this evidence of having a history where you used to feel none. I believe that all humans need that sense of belonging, of being seen and known. And it wasn't just me. I had so many lesbian friends who were just giddy about this TV show, and we would be comparing notes about, oh, have you found the book that translates her actual journals? And, you know, oh, this one has more historical detail, but this one is easier to read. And just, we were so excited about it. So here is a post-it in the middle there from when I was actually watching this TV show. And I know what was happening that night from a combo of the art and the words, because the art is a picture of Anne Lister herself, so that gives me that hint. And the words say how shockingly simple to just catch you on the phone, which reminds me that I was talking to a friend I've known since kindergarten who also turned out to be lesbian, and she's really hard to connect with since she's had children. And I just remember this phone call where we were just gushing about this new TV show and talking about the different books and all of that. I mean, just sort of basking in the excitement of not feeling alone in this, or not feeling like outliers for a moment. Thinking about how much of my community's history has been buried or destroyed or just lost, it suddenly made total sense to me that I, like Anne Lister, obsessively record my life, and in a visual form, as little pieces of art, something that is defiantly meant to be seen, not just privately hidden away like her journals. something I think normal human language fails us in is in holding opposites together. For example, my queerness holds opposites. It can make me feel vulnerably exposed, but it, at the same time, can make my experiences invisible in larger society. And queer history is both the actual people and events and also made out of what's missing. So queer history holds opposites in that it is made of wholes, things we can't know. So it's hard sometimes to know how to say this. And I think it's very human to feel multiple opposite things at once, very different things at the same time, and not quite know how to express that together, because normal language forces us to choose, to say one thing first, to make it sound like you feel just one way or another. So even before I started this nightly ritual, I'd always loved the way that Post-its hold opposites, because they're literally designed to hold on to something that you're going to forget, but they're also designed to be disposable. They're meant to be thrown away. They're such a common object that I don't think we all think about it very much, but it's always been fascinating to me that you would hold on to something with something you throw away. And the fact that I chose to extravagantly, perpetually record my queer life in Post-its, something meant to be discarded, is incredibly fitting. It honors how history has traditionally treated gayness as something to be tossed aside, not kept as part of the permanent record, but it honors that while also doing the opposite, of saving my history and making me feel seen. And here's the thing, feeling unseen is not just part of the gay experience. It's part of the whole human experience. It's something that happens to everyone. In my Post-its, I'm often treating them like I'm only talking to myself, like keeping myself company late at night before bed, like I don't need to explain anything. They're just kind of relaxed and intimate. But this deep intimacy of not explaining what I'm talking about can actually make them hard for other people to fully understand. There are parts that have like immediate associations or meanings, but other parts where they have to imagine or fill in the gaps with their own experiences or ideas. For example, you might look at this one of the keys and think, it says, I wonder what else I unwittingly screwed up. And you probably know I forgot my keys, right? And you might think, yeah, I've forgotten my keys too. You might look at the one with Kermit the Frog and recognize Kermit the Frog, but not really know what I was talking about with shared loves and cold toes. Similarly, my friendship heart swoons. I don't even remember what moment I was in that moment that made me say that, but I can still access that feeling, and I think other people can think of their own friendship moments and access that too. But yeah, there are ways in which we just you can't know all of what I mean, and I like that it lets you sit with the not knowing, and you can be amused by it or intrigued by the mystery of it or imagine your own meaning. I think that we often assume that intimacy means knowing the most about each other, knowing everything. But this project reminds me that we can't know everything, and there's so many things inside each of us. Humans are all just a much bigger picture than any one person can see at once, or even that we can see in ourselves at once. So I feel like my Post-its lay bare all the million little things we just never fully know about each other, whether we're friends or strangers, and whether we have tons in common or live hugely different lives. And my hope is that we can value each other's humanity anyway. That looking at these, engaging with this ritual around personal visibility, helps us value even those we can't know. That we can appreciate the opposites and what's known and what's unknown, and appreciate each other anyway, without having to know everything. So for you all, before we get to the Q&A part, I have a little activity that I would like to invite you to participate in. I'd love for you to grab a Post-it and a pen or pencil from over there, and just think of one thing about your day today that maybe nobody else knows. It could be a thought you had, something you saw, feeling, any little thing, a memory from the past that washed over you. And I want you to spend some time with it, remember it, honor it, and potentially write or draw, represent it somehow on a Post-it. And then it's your choice if you want it to be seen or not. I can share them. We can stick them on the post there, but you also don't have to share them. Or you could share it with somebody who's close to you later if you want. Those of you who are streaming at home could do this with the people that you live with, or you could just do it on your own. Take a moment. So while you are doing that, I'm going to move to a couple other little slides to tell you one more little thing about Jack Straw here. But grab the Post-its. So again, just doesn't have to be a big thing, just something maybe nobody knows about your day today. Maybe you haven't even thought about it yet. And like I said, there's no pressure to share, but happy to share them if people want to. While you're doing that, I just want to thank Jack Straw for having me and say that I found the Post-it from when I found out I was a Jack Straw Fellow. Back in 2014, when I found out I was in it, and my day was a combo of wanting to say that I had a blister on my tongue and being very excited that I was a Jack Straw Fellow. I also deciphered that this middle Post-it is from our first orientation. And the words say, "This is such a good thing, I think." There's 12 chairs for the 12 Jack Straw Fellows, and it was such an amazing moment of community for me. So again, in this talk that's sort of talking about the importance of feeling a part of community through different rituals, this program was a really amazing one for me, and helped me make one of my best friends as well. So it was fun to go back and see what I was thinking on the actual night. And we're not going to, If you get really into your Post-it and you want to do a really detailed drawing, you are welcome to. But I'm not going to take forever on them. You can always take it home. Does anybody want to share theirs or let me share theirs? I don't necessarily. I spend way too long on these at night. You want to share yours? Oh, yeah, you can't share it. This one has what looks to me like my parents' kitchen. And it says, all tidied, a surprise. It sounds like a positive memory to me. Well, if anybody else wants to share them, you can let me know, or you can stick them on the wall anonymously if you want.
Even your writing looks artistic.
Well, I am a professional. Ooh, this also sounds good. It was my day. Ah, there's a mug of something, a warm beverage, coffee. There's like relaxing on, is it like a massage?
Yes.
Wow. And some writing in a book. Lovely. I apologize, I'm not sure what the other thing is.
Oh, that's a newspaper.
A newspaper! What a great day! I love it. Thank you for sharing. I would like to open it up for Q&A as well. Were there any images people wanted to go back to ask questions about, or just questions in general about anything I was talking about or the project? Yeah.
Yeah, so you've been doing this for a long time and you're going to display it. I'm wondering, two questions. Do you display it in order? And if you do you see like arcs of emotion or experience as you put it all together, kind of like a puzzle?
Yeah. My plan is to display them in order. And yes, I have very strange experiences when I look back over them because it does take me through big stages in my life. It takes, when I started them, I was in England in grad school. And the first few years are with my ex-wife. And then there's a sudden shift to America when that sort of life just ends. And I move here very suddenly. So the first time I ever exhibited them, I really had an emotional reckoning with going back and looking at those ones from my partnered life. These are some of the very first ones. And the other thing is, you can tell, like, over time, I can piece together where I was or the narrative of it. Other people can probably figure out some of it, but not all of it. You can tell also, like, I started with yellow, just plain yellow, and then, eventually I did branch out. So you can see stylistic changes, which is strange for me as well, to sort of see my progression into getting more and more ambitious with some of the imagery. In the early ones, they were a lot more basic, some of them, and I didn't even do them every night at the beginning. So it's a little messy at the beginning where there's little gaps. There's also this huge gap that is confusing for me to know how to deal with in public settings, because I did it for a while, and then in 2007, 2008, my insomnia was so out of control that I was getting about 1 hour a night. Also, a very difficult thing had happened with my grandfather. Had died from suicide, and I was just struggling. I could not have goals other than just my work, my teaching, just to get through each day. And I just stopped doing it for 2 years. And then in 2009, I suddenly started doing it again, and was really certain that time, like, yes, every night now, forever, hopefully for the rest of my life. But even that was kind of messy because the first post-it in 2009 says a 3-year gap on it. And then I looked back and I was like, oh, it was a 2-year gap. It wasn't a 3-year gap. So it's just, so there's things like that will be visible in this exhibition if people are being really detail oriented. But at this point, there's 6,000 or so post-its. So the biggest concern is just how to safely get them on the wall, but yes, I like to do them in chronological order because I do think it's interesting to see both that there is some narrative to day, and then also our lives are not very linear as well, and how we think about each day is not linear too. It's not like reading somebody's memoir where it moves from one thing to another in this clear fashion. Like, I could be in the midst of my divorce and talking about a mug of tea, yeah. But yeah, they get a lot denser over time sometimes. And then also, these are pretty early ones as well. These are from right after the divorce. But also, at some point, I did let myself start using marker. And that also makes a big change. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have a plan for yourself of how these are going to be a part of your life, say 20 years from now?
Do I have a plan for how they'll be part of my life 20 years from now? I hope to still be making them. I hope to just still be doing it every night. For me, they are a really important ritual, and I like to use them through this talk to invite people to think about how we can make our own rituals that serve us, where there are gaps, where we're missing something. So they are a very helpful ritual for me for bedtime. I also write in the journal before bed, and then I do my post-it. But so they're a really helpful holding thing for me as a person. They're also a really helpful ritual for me as an artist because they do let me explore all my styles without boundaries and without somebody immediately seeing them. And then, professionally, I would like to get them published as a series of graphic novels. I would love to be able to preserve them that way. Post-its don't last forever. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious how it feels when other people are looking at them. They're so intimate, but you're also sharing them. So I was curious what that experience is like.
Yeah, it's such a mixture of things because as an artist, it's wonderful to have people see what you've made, right? In general, you're always trying to get it out there. But also, and I would also say that as a queer person, like I said, feeling invisible in history, it can feel wonderful to feel visible. It can also feel terrifying, very vulnerable, like it could be misconstrued or misunderstood. Can feel very exposing as well. I have a weird relationship with the post-its where when I make them, if I look back at my post-it from last night or the night before, it will look like utter trash to me. Like, it will look like the dumbest thing I've ever made. And I'll think, ugh, I'm really going downhill with this project. Like, this is awkward. 3 weeks later, I will think it's the most brilliant thing I've ever made in my life. So in some ways, when I look back at these while looking at them with you, I'm like, oh, look at that drawing of the lake there with the trees and the rain. Like, what a great, what a great drawing, or like, so it can be kind of wonderful to look back with the, with a different perspective, but it's a really changing kind of negotiation at all times between those different feelings. Yeah. But yeah, when I make them at night, I really have this feeling that, that it's really just me and the Post-it. Like, no one will see it. Mm-hmm.
Haven't you had some smaller shows of some Post-it art? Is that different from your nighttime rituals, or is it just segments?
Yeah, so yeah, the question is, have I shown other, had smaller exhibitions? Yes, I have shown reproductions of the Post-its before. I had a show in 2011. I had a big show at Hugo House. That was so, it felt like so many Post-its at the time, but it was really not compared to now. It was so long ago. So I have shown them in different venues in sort of small amounts, or I used to publish them in Seattle Review of Books, just excerpts with little lyric essays about them. But it's been a long time since I've shown them all, and I've never actually shown all the real ones. I showed a few of the real ones at Bainbridge Island Museum of Art a couple years ago, but there wasn't room for more than about 100. So yeah, this show in May is a new big thing. Yeah. You guys have not asked the question that everyone asks the first time they hear about this project. And I've often been surprised why everyone asks this question, but the question that usually everyone asks first is, how do you store them? Which is like this. They're just in spiral bound sketch pads with sort of thick paper so they don't crumple. And I'm currently in my 14th one, I think. Yeah. So that's how I store them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you first started doing it, did you imagine you'd be sharing them with other people? And then I guess if not, did your thinking while you're making them, is it different when you know that you probably will be sharing?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. So did I imagine when I first started making them that I'd be sharing them with people? And I think the answer was maybe, because I knew that I wanted to be a professional artist and writer. I was in grad school for art at the time. And it seemed, again, I hadn't realized my own sort of personal relationship to it in terms of queer history and feeling erased from that. But I was aware of the idea of wanting to hold on to passing moments as a human kind of universal experience, and this opposites in the Post-its of holding on to things you'll forget while also being thrown away. And so I did feel like I had a really good idea at the time. I was like, this is a good art idea. And I was excited about it, but I also had no sense of a venue for it, and I was just getting started, when it's just a few Post-its at the beginning. And I tried to show it. I put them in a little binder in my grad school final show, and my professors thought it was totally nothing to spend time on, and they were like, why are you showing these with your paintings, you weirdo? So I didn't have a great, there wasn't an immediate public, show us more. So for a long time I did think I didn't know if they would be interesting to anyone else. And I didn't feel like I wanted to assume that they would be interesting to anyone else. So when I did that show at Hugo House in 2011, I was actually really touched and surprised how much people could bring their own experience to it as well, and find things that resonated from their day, or also people who knew me could recognize themselves in post-its that I had no sense they could recognize themselves in a way that actually felt kind of magical. But yes, there is sometimes, I put this slide up and I'm like, oh, am I going to offend somebody about James Bond movies when I say, like, I don't even know why I was thinking that. That was not when I saw my first James Bond movie. I don't think that's what I was watching in grad school, but yeah, so, there is a little moment sometimes when I'm making them of like, oh, is this the right way to say this, or what if somebody sees this? There's many that also have my boobs in them that I did not put in this presentation. They're not super realistic renderings, but just things, body stuff. There's health stuff that comes up that does sometimes feel like, oh, how will this be? But at this point, there's also so many of them that there's a little bit of they get hidden in the mix. Yeah.
So those will be in the...
They will all be there. How people can see them all is another question. I'm going to encourage people to bring binoculars, because I think some of them will be so high up that you will have to treat it like bird watching. That's my thinking for it. Did anybody have any other questions or questions about things in any of the post-its? I'm trying to think of other questions people often ask me too. One thing I haven't talked about is the colors too much. There is a little sort of code for me with the colors. These are all excerpts, so it's hard to catch up on it. But when you see the actual exhibition, if you come, I use one stack at a time, and I started with yellow because that was traditional. I wanted it to be really post-it-y. But eventually I let myself branch out and I move into a different color for the duration of that stack. But I also switch colors for when I switch locations, just to show myself a little bit of what was happening. So there's a time in my life in England when we were moving back and forth multiple times within a week between different places where the post-its are just all different colors. Or if I go away for a weekend or I go away for a residency, I change colors. And that has ended up being kind of a weird thing for me, trying to decide what color stack to use as I approach a trip or approach just running out of that stack of post-its. It taps into my synesthesia a lot, and I try to think like, what color will this experience be? And then sometimes I get it really wrong, where like a classic example I think of is I brought dark blue on a trip that was really not a dark blue trip. It's just like doesn't, and so sometimes I try and bring a variety, but where it's like, well, what color is this season going to be? And I just can't know. So the color does affect how they look. It's a little game I play with myself, basically. Yeah.
We did have an internet question, which is sort of like
Lovely.
sort of connected to mine. Did you notice your approach to the post-it ritual change when you decided you begin sharing it? Like when you knew for sure, like...
Yeah. So I think I answered some of that already, but also I will say that as I approach showing them all, I have noticed myself getting judgier each night with myself. It's not so much about privacy or what people will understand, but I've found that I'm a little meaner to myself about what they're looking like each night, and I'm hoping that I still have the experience where 3 weeks later they look brilliant. But that is sort of something I've been trying to note with myself, and that feels a little sad, but also very human. That it, when you put yourself out there, sometimes you do start to anticipate how it looks to other people. And I try not to do that too much with these, but I'm only human. It happens, for sure. This is just a little tidbit for you guys, but the blue post-it with the buildings in the corner is about my friend who died, who spawned those paintings on post-its that I first did. She was never alive while I was doing this project, but I think of her a lot when I'm doing post-its, and we had a radio show together, and that was a post-it from the decade anniversary of her death. No, the 20-year anniversary of her death. And it just says, "I still hear you on the radio like the whole neighborhood had opened its windows just when I was looking." So I put it in this talk kind of as a little gift for myself to think about her. That post-it on the right side, the pink one, is that same friend I was talking to about Gentleman Jack, who's hard to get a hold of now that she's got kids. Let's make it more than once a year. Connection is tricky and a constant thing we have to work at, just in general, for all of us, I think. Any other people who want to share any of their moments from the day or ask any last questions? I think we've about at our time, but we've got a little. Yeah.
I was wondering if you throw any away because you screwed up, having just
Oh.
found it hard to do.
I'm so glad you've asked that. I actually have a rule for myself across all of my art that I don't. I don't throw things, I don't discard something partway through. And there are times with my post-its when I've been kind of angry at myself that I have that rule, because there's some that really did not go how I thought, or I take it too far. I'm drawing a person or something, and I'm like, I don't know if I can draw their face, but I'm going to try. And then I think, oh no, now it looks like a totally different thing to me. And I have to sort of redirect and cover it up. But no, I don't ever break that particular rule. And I do really like kind of creative constraints for myself, sort of as a holding thing for my creative process. But I will say I do break other rules that I have for myself with the Post-its. So the first time I got a writing residency, I was so excited that I let myself make 2 Post-its every night because I just wanted so much. I wanted to save it all. I can't let myself do that long term. Again, unsustainable. But in that 2-week period, I let myself do that. Or I will break my own rule occasionally with, when I was auditioning for this program to do this talk, my dad was in the hospital for a couple weeks in a really scary situation, and I had taken him to the ER I'd been in the ER overnight for 14 hours, and I did not bring a Post-it with me. I did not know I was going to be there all night, and of course, Post-its was not what I was packing to take him to the hospital. But when I got home, I found that I had so many vivid memories, and I needed to put them somewhere from that night. I needed to mark that night in the project. So I did make a Post-it about it. When I've done that for myself, I write, instead of just writing the date, I write for that date, which is a little signal to myself that I cheated. And I do think I need to be allowed to cheat sometimes. I think as you make your own rituals too, it's important not to be harsh with them. It's great to create rituals that can create a holding for you without beating yourself up if you don't do it all the time, or you don't, it is important for me to basically do this every night. But yeah, there are times when it doesn't work out. But I still don't ever throw them away. I used to do pencil. I used to do pencil back in the day. I don't know if I have any pencil ones in this example. Oh, there's pencil. Every now and then I do pencil, but it started to fade so much that when I did think about showing them, I thought pencil isn't sustainable. There's one with some pencil in the Idaho Pride moment in the corner there. Yeah. I used to also write the date on the back. That was something that changed from the beginning. I wrote the date on the back, and sometimes I'd write words on the back, and I stopped letting myself do that most of the time when I realized I was going to make it public. Okay, how are we doing for, yep, any more questions? You guys have been so great about asking questions. Love it.
Thanks for asking all these.
No, love it. It's great. Somebody's got to do it.
How did you end up in this career? And, how did you find art and writing in your life?
I don't quite know how to pinpoint it because my earliest kind of memory of myself is of wanting to be an artist. And I honestly don't know why. From that age, I don't know why it was something that was so set in me. But I did always really love drawing and eventually writing once I learned how. But drawing, of course, is something that you learn before you learn to write. And I do think some of it stems from what I now know is sort of, you could say, my personality, but also just like neurodivergence and medical difference that led me to feel like I really needed to express things differently than I was given normal modes for, and also somewhere to put emotions. But also, from a very young age, my one of the first sort of self-made rituals, I would say, which is not really self-made, it was made for me by my parents. When I had childhood asthma and would wake up really, really unable to breathe in the middle of the night, I'd have to go to their room. They'd come downstairs and we would do my nebulizer. And they created a ritual for me around using these two very particular giant oversized coloring books that I was only allowed to use during my nebulizer treatments, that was like on the floor and just sort of like I was basically on top of the pages coloring them. And drawing really always kept me really calm. It was really soothing for me. The sort of just the physical act of drawing is very soothing for me. So in some ways I would say that my family of origin taught me this way of making your own rituals when you needed them. There was no societal ritual for when you're having a medical emergency that happens every night, right? So they created that holding space for me, and it was through drawing, which I think they realized was a safe space for me, just for whatever reason. Other like family rituals I think of that were different were like the tooth fairy. And my family of origin does not take your tooth from under your pillow because obviously I was going to wake up. I was insomniac. I was very light sleeper, whatever. Our tooth fairy came and took them from a glass of water by the bed. Like, I never thought that was weird. I was like, well, yeah, obviously different rituals for different tooth fairy families. So I would say art is just part of my earliest memories, and I don't, it's just always sort of been a core of what I wanted to do. What I didn't know when I was younger was how you make it happen as a career. And I would say that's a thing that we're all still just kind of figuring out as we go, because there's no like model that anyone shows you that's like, well, you do these steps and then you just do it. But yeah, I just sort of knew I needed to do it. It sounds obscure, and it is a little obscure to me too.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you all for coming. And thanks to people who are streaming at home too. And thanks for participating. If you want to leave your Post-its, maybe I'll take a picture of them at the end just for remembering. Or you can take them home, share them with people. And I hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Thank you. And thanks.
In February and March.
Yes, and thanks to Jack Straw and to Humanities Washington.
Oh, and fill out the.
Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you. This is my first time doing this. Here we go. If people could fill out. Yes. We would love, Humanities Washington would really appreciate feedback. So grab the QR code in your preferred language. Thank you. Sorry I didn't do that earlier.